Our guest this week on Veterans Chronicles is August Bolino. He is a World War II veteran of the U.S. Army Air Corps. He served in the 8th Air Force in the European theater and took part in bombing runs from Berlin to the beaches of Normandy. He is also the author of a book about his time in the 8th Air Force entitled The 8th Air Force Won the War in Europe. And Mr. Bolino, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, I'm very happy to tell every American how the Americans won the war.
Excellent. Well, we're glad you're here to tell that story. Let's begin at the beginning of your story. When were you born and where were you born?
I was born on September 30th, 1922. I was born on number 8 Henry Street in Maverick Square, East Boston, Massachusetts.
And so if you were born in 1922, you were 19 years old when Pearl Harbor was attacked. Is that right?
Correct, I guess, yeah.
What was your reaction?
I wanted to join right away. My mother held me up. She said, wait a while. And I did wait. I didn't sign. I signed up on July 31, 1942.
And so you enlisted, you weren't drafted?
No, I was drafted.
Okay.
In fact, every night when I had dinner at 6 o'clock, I turned on my little portable radio, and each night Roosevelt had a little girl reach into a barrel and take out 6 numbers. And they kept taking out numbers. They never called mine until finally, one day the young girl handed something to President Roosevelt, and he said, and the next number is 358. That was my number. And I said, oh, God, I said to my mother, I'm going to be drafted. I said, I'm going to go tomorrow and join the Army Air Corps, which I did. I went to Commonwealth Avenue, where there was a U.S. Army center there, and I signed up. I was sworn in on July 31, 1942, but I had to wait till early 1943 to be called to active duty because they didn't have enough airplanes for the thousands of people who signed up for the Air Force. And that took them a long time, many months, to put them all into active service. When I got called to active service, they sent me to Nashville, Tennessee. Nashville was a very large place. We all spent about 3 days there, and every minute of every day we were taking tests. And finally, at the end of the 3rd day, they called you in and they said, to me, Mr. Bolino, we're sending you to navigation school. And I said to the major, I said, but I signed up to be a pilot. He said, we looked at your college record and you just took calculus. I said, yes, I passed it. He said, that's why we want to send you to navigation school, because you seem to know how to deal with numbers. And I said, if I have to, I'll do that. So then they sent me to, they said, go to El Paso, Texas. And I got on the train. It was a long ride. And when I got to El Paso, there were 9 people waiting there for me. They would make up our crew. I was the last one to become a part of the crew. That was in El Paso. Then the next day they said to us, take the train back to Brooklyn, New York. And we got there in Brooklyn.
The next day they said that?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, we had nothing to do in Texas.
Okay.
So they sent us back to New York. And they said to us, tomorrow, go to Pier 57. There's a boat waiting for you there. And I said, okay. And we all, the 10 of us, wound up the next day in a rather large boat called the Mauritania. I knew the name, so I looked it up, and sure enough, there had been a Mauritania 1 in World War I. This is Mauritania 2 in World War II. We got on board, and we headed towards the Atlantic Ocean. Things were going pretty well until we were about, I would guess, 5/8 of the way across to England, and we hit a monsoon and all kinds of things. The ship was just being battered left and right, up and down, and everybody on the ship was throwing up except 100 guys who were in the Air Corps. not one of us threw up. The reason we didn't throw up was because we each carried 4 bottles of bourbon. And the reason we brought our own bourbon was they don't sell bourbon in England. All they sell is Scotch. So we each had 4 bottles of bourbon. Not one of us got sick.
So that calms the stomach, huh?
Oh yeah, it's great for a stomach. And we knew how to drink bourbon. I never had tasted Scotch before there, but then that's all they served in our base was Scotch. So we got to accept it, but I didn't like it at all. It had no real taste, no real flavor. But that's all we had. They pulled one kind of a thing on me after our first mission. The major said to me, "I have a special mission for you. I want you to get in that plane over there and go across, all the way across England. There's a special thing for you to pick up." So I got in the plane and we went to where we were supposed to go. And on the runway, there were several boxes. They were like 5 feet high and 8 or 9 feet long. And we put them all in our flying fortress, and we took them back to our base, which is at Nettershall. They started opening the boxes. It was all Scotch. That was for the Saturday parties we ran every Saturday, and they needed a lot more whiskey. And I guess they think Scotch is whiskey. We didn't think so. We thought that bourbon was whiskey. And anyway, that was a thing that we were kind of shocked to know that we went across the whole country just to get Scotch. But that's all there was.
Well, eventually the pursuit of bourbon had to give way to some combat missions. What do you remember about your earliest bombing missions?
The first mission was really not a mission. We couldn't have seen a German anywhere from that air, and we just dropped bombs. We didn't drop bombs. We dropped boxes for the French underground. The next day, we went to the meeting place where there was a major, and he would tell us where we were going and etc. And he had a wall that was I'm guessing about 14 feet across. And on the left side of it, there was a piece of wood that he could push the covering on the wall aside slowly. And as he moved this piece of cloth to the right, we got letters: B, and then E, and then R, and then L, and then I, and N. And we know how to spell the word Berlin. That was our second mission to Berlin. And we knew it was going to be a pretty bad situation because our fighter planes that were escorting us didn't have enough gasoline to take us to the target. So we went south, and then we went east across France. When we came to the eastern border of Germany, we turned left, and we started way up as far as we could go to get towards Berlin. When we turned left, the Germans had a flying field on the left and a flying field on the right. On the left, they had Messerschmitt 109s. That was their best airplane. On the right, they had Messerschmitt 190, the Focke-Wulfs. Excuse me, I said Messerschmitt. I meant Focke-Wulf. So they had 2 different airplanes waiting for us. As soon as we turned left to start up towards Berlin, they attacked us. And our planes, the P-51 Mustang and the P-38 Lightning, they didn't have enough gasoline to get to Berlin. So when they got to the Berlin line, they turned around and went back to base. They left us unguided. And I think that was a mistake, because a flying fortress, we have 8 or 9 guns, but we have a hard time knocking off a plane that's coming at us at 240 or 50 miles an hour. So the advantage turned to Germans. We went up to Berlin, dropped our bombs, we caught fire to the city, and we got back home. And then we realized, when they counted the planes, we had lost 57 bombers. That's 570 airmen. That's a very big loss, 570. And the reason was that our fighter pilots did not have enough gasoline to take us to the target. When we got out of our airplanes, the colonel, he greeted us over here, and then a sergeant came by, and he said to the colonel, he said, "You know, Colonel," he said, "why can't we build something like the shape of a barrel, maybe bigger, and make it the length of the wings of these airplanes, and fill them up with gasoline and bracket them under the wings of each airplane?" And the colonel said, "That's a pretty good idea. We'll do it tonight." They had one hangar in which they could repair airplanes and they could make things. And all night, these 3 or 4 people made 4 of these things, whatever you want to call them. They were like a great big barrel. They filled them up with gasoline. They made the angle iron to fasten them to. And from that point on, our fighter pilots stayed with us to the target because they had enough gasoline. That guy probably saved hundreds of lives by telling the colonel, "Why don't we make these things like the shape of a barrel?" And I went to the colonel. I said, "Colonel, don't you think he should get a medal?" And the colonel didn't even answer me. He just walked away. He didn't want to give a medal to a man who really earned one. He saved a lot of lives. But from then on, our Mustangs and our Lightnings, they came with us all the way to the target. And that made it a fair fight, because then they could shoot down a few of the German planes along the way, and we were safer. So to me, it was a small thing, but it was a big thing.
It was a huge thing.
Because we now had 2 fighter planes that had rather large gasoline tanks under their wing, they could take us to any place we had to bomb. That was a vast improvement, and that could have saved hundreds of lives.
When we come back, Mr. Bolino will discuss the mission that earned him a Distinguished Flying Cross, and he'll take us into the details of his 2 missions on D-Day. Much more with August Bolino, navigator on a B-17 bomber out of the 8th U.S. Air Force, in just a moment. We're back on Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Columbus. Our guest this week is August Bolino, a navigator on a B-17 bomber crew operating out of the 8th Air Force. We just heard about some of his earliest missions, but soon after that he took part in one that earned him one of the highest awards an aviator can receive.
One of the missions I want to talk about gave me a Distinguished Flying Cross. The mission was to Liège, which is in Belgium. Liège was the capital of Belgium, and it had factories completely surrounding the city. And so when we went to briefing, the major said, "You ought to go to Liège and destroy all those factories, because they are providing the German with things that will harm you. And you must destroy those factories in Liège." So we went south, and then we went east. Well, actually, we didn't go very far east. We stayed more or less in the west. And Liège was just west, a little bit west of Germany. And there was a road all the way up the whole country. And we learned where to turn left into that place. And we started towards the capital of Liège. We got within an hour of the capital, and they shot down the lead plane. Lead plane had a colonel in it, and a leading navigator, and a lead pilot. They were the top guys. They were shot down. The plane to their right took over, and in 5 minutes later, they were shot down. All the planes in the air scattered, because they figured if the Germans can shoot down 2 planes, they might be able to shoot 4 or 5 or 6. So they scattered in all directions. I talked to the pilot of our plane. His name was Daniel Houghton. He was from Chicago. He was a good pilot. I said, Dan, what are we going to do now? I said, our whole group is scattered. He said, I'll take over. He said, I'm the lead. I'm leading the high squadron, and I would take over. So he did something you're not supposed to do. He spoke to planes that weren't inside of you but were next to you, because they said if you talk to a plane beside you, Berlin will pick you up and they'll know exactly where you are, and they will send fighter planes there to knock you down. But he had to tell everybody that he was taking over as lead, and they had to come back. They were scattered all over the sky. They had to come back and reform into a group, which they did. And then he said to me, he turned around, I was right behind him, he said to me, I need a direction. So I said to him, I used my fingers like this, and I guessed, I said, I think it's about 15 degrees where I want to be. So I said, try 15 degrees. He said, okay. And he told the group, we had started out with, let's see now, we would have had we would have had 18 airplanes, and we wound up with only 16. And so he said, he spoke to the guns all around him, which he wasn't supposed to do, but he said, I'm taking over lead. I'm the high squadron leader, and I'm moving in. Please gather around me. And then he said to me, I need a direction. And I studied my fingers, and I did this, and I said, Dan, try 15 degrees, because that was about like this, you see. And sure enough, we wound up right over the target, and we dropped our bombs. We destroyed almost every factory that was around Liège. We went back to the base. When we landed, the colonel was waiting, and when he saw me, he said to me, you did a great job. I want to thank you. He said, you saved our mission. And I said, well, that was my job. Yeah, but he said, I put you in for a DFC. And I said, what's that? He said, it's a Distinguished Flying Cross. And I said, well, I'm going to get a medal? He said, oh, yeah. He said, you saved the mission. And 3 weeks later on my bed, they threw a medal. And I brought it home. Of course, I've got it here. So that's how I got a medal. It's the only one I got. Well, I shouldn't say that. I got two others, but I didn't do anything for those other two. One was an air medal, which for some reason they gave you if you finished 25 missions. That was what they did when the group first was formed. They flew 25 missions. Any plane that could finish 25 missions got a medal. So I got a medal for finishing 25 missions. And then the third medal I got because it was a European theater, I think was what they called it, medal. So I wound up, when I left the Air Force, with 3 medals. And they're home. I hide them because I don't want my sons to get at them. They all 3 of them want all 3 medals. So I have to hide the 3 medals. I don't know who will ever get them. They'll have to decide that after they bury me.
Bolino also took part in 2 missions on D-Day, June 6, 1944, and he vividly remembers many of the details from that fateful day.
In order to talk about D-Day, I have to talk about five generals who were planning it. They were in a building in London on the 4th floor, and there was a window, and under the window there were 5 letters, S-H-A-E-F. And for a long time, I never knew what those letters stood for until I kept asking people, and somebody knew. They stood for Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. Now, there were 5 generals up there, and they planned every mission. There were 2 French and 2 British, and we had 1 general there named Dwight Eisenhower. And they voted him to be in charge of the meetings there. And they planned every mission. They told us when to go. Now, in order to understand why they know so much, I have to go back in time. September 3rd, 1939. What happened then?
The Germans
World War
are invading.
II started.
Yep.
Now, when World War II started, Germany invaded Poland. The British did something that was truly spectacular. They sent 300 spies to Germany. Every spy spoke perfect German. They were told to walk the streets, learn what they could every day, and then around midnight send the information to the 8th Air Force in England. So every day, sometime close to midnight, but usually about 11:30, these spies would gather up all their information and send it to the 8th Air Force. They would learn, for example, a very important thing for us, if the Germans moved their anti-aircraft guns, we ought to know that. Because if we didn't know that, we would fly around a gun that we thought we were going around, but if they moved the gun, then you could be shot down. So that was an important thing that we learned every day, whether the Germans had moved the anti-aircraft guns. I will say this, and I think everybody will agree, they were the best anti-aircraft gunners in the world because they were 25,000 feet below us. And they could shoot a shell so that it would go up and then it would turn this way and hit the target they were aiming for, which was always a B-17. They kept downing B-17s everywhere. And we had to do something about it. And what we did about it, of course, was to send fighter planes out to destroy those guns on the ground. Now, these 5 generals, no one knows this, I don't think, declared D-Day to be on June 2nd. They chose June 2nd because they didn't realize it was going to rain for 5 days, which it did. It rained 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th. It didn't rain on the 6th. It's only 4 days of rain. But it's a rain I've never seen in my lifetime. The rain was as big as a silver dollar. It was coming down in buckets. You could go outside for 1 minute, you would be totally drenched. You couldn't do anything. We sat in the briefing room from 7:45 until 4 p.m., and they said, go to your barracks. That was the 2nd. The 3rd, we duplicated the 2nd. The 4th, we duplicated the 2nd. The 5th, we didn't duplicate the 2nd. We did something else. On the 5th of June, we sat in the briefing room till 5 p.m. We thought they would send us back to our barracks, but they didn't. They kept us waiting there. We waited 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. At 11:30, Dwight Eisenhower comes on the intercom, and he says, "My fellow Americans, you are about to embark on a great crusade." And he tells us how many boats are going to be there. I think it was 5,000. And how many airplanes? I think it was 2,500. And if you know Eisenhower, you might know that when he left the military, he was elected president of Columbia University. And what did he do at Columbia? He wrote a book called The Great Crusade, because he was in charge of D-Day. And I never read that book, but I didn't need to. I was there. I don't have to read about how it happened. I was there from 7:45 a.m. until 11:30 p.m. So we went to Normandy. Now, first of all, let me tell you this. in the water, there were so many ships, small and big, that in the briefing they said to the pilots, "You cannot ditch. There's no place for you to put an airplane in the water." So he said, "You must test your 4 engines before getting on the water." He said, because you would simply crush several people if you tried to ditch, because there was no water. There was nothing but 5,000 boats of every size. They covered all the water. So that was one thing. The second thing was they said when you start heading towards Normandy, you should test your guns. I had 2 guns. Everybody had guns except the pilots. Pilots were the only ones who didn't have guns. But everybody else had to test their guns. And they said that if your gun jammed, you really wouldn't have time to fix it. And they suggested that you turn around and go back home. And 2 or 3 planes did that. They tested their engines and the guns, and they said they weren't working properly, and they made a U-turn, and they left the gang. It was a gang of planes. Now, when they took the beach of Normandy, it was sort of like this, and they divided it into 3 parts. We were assigned to the 3rd part, which had a name, Pointe du Hoc. I don't know what French means, but I have no idea I know what point means, but not hoc. Whatever, if you know French, then you can help me. I do not know what the word means, but we were to bomb. Each of those 3 places had a 16-inch gun. And a 16-inch gun, I mean, it's that size. It's huge. And how they would think a 500-pound bomb would destroy a 16-inch gun is really beyond me. I mean, it was just a waste of shells. We had 12 500-pound bombs. Every plane carried the same load, but not one of those 3 guns was injured. So we dropped our bombs, and we went back to base. We hadn't slept much, so most of us fell into bed. We slept from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. And at 4 p.m., that we had a door to the wall here, and our door opens, and a sergeant walks in. He flicks the light on, which was right beside the door, and he said one word to us. He said, "Mission." We called him names I can't repeat here, because they were pretty foul names. And he said, no, he said, you have to go back out. And he said, because, and this is what he said, the mission is in jeopardy. So we quickly jumped out of bed, we dressed, and we headed to briefing again. When we got there, the major was ready for us. He said to us, up to now, all planes have been flying strategic missions. And they got those missions from that tower in downtown London. That group of 5 generals chose the target each time. But now, things are different, you see. So we didn't know what they were going to do next, because they said you always flew strategic missions, but you're not going to today anymore. And we were waiting, and he said, we're going to send you out on a tactical mission. He said each plane will fly by itself. It will fly any altitude in any direction, but it must find something to destroy in Germany. So that was the end of the first mission. Was about noon, yeah, and we slept till 4 p.m. So that must have been about 6 to 7 o'clock when we were at the second briefing. And of course, it was starting to get dark. So we couldn't hurry. We had to refill our airplane with both gasoline and bombs, and then we knew where we were going. We were going to go back to where we bombed in the morning, and from that point we decided we would go up the coast. And I talked to the pilot into going up the coast because I said to him, when we drop bombs in the morning, I said, I looked at the coast. I said, it's a perfectly straight line all the way to the horizon. I said, we ought to be able to find something this afternoon that we can bomb. He said, okay, Senator, we'll do that. So I called the bombardier who was sitting behind me. I said, Max, come here. His name was Max Kemp. I said, Max, how far away do you think that horizon is up there? He looked like this and he said, oh, that'll take about 12 minutes to fly there. And I said to him, you want to use your eyesight or do you want to use the northern bomb sight? He said, I'll take the bomb sight. Now, the northern bomb sight was about this wide and about that long. It had a white line here, which was fastened. I don't know what purpose it served. I don't think it served any purpose. But the white line in the middle had wheels under it. If you turned them clockwise, that white line moved closer to the front, which meant that the bombs would go off sooner. If you turned these wheels counterclockwise, they'd come this way, and you'd have a longer time before the bombs dropped out. So Max Kemp set it for 12 minutes. And we sat down, we just talked. We had nothing better to do. Everything was totally automatic. On the 12th minute, the bomb bay doors open, and all our bombs fall out. And underneath those bombs was a very large train depot, very large, one of the biggest I've ever seen. To the right of that was a train. The train, I counted 9 cars, packed. People had their heads sticking out the window. They were waiting. They were sort of standing between the cars. It was packed. They must have put every single person they could put in that train into it. And when we dropped our bombs on the depot, we killed most of the German soldiers. It was the first time we had ever seen the people we killed. Because when you drop a bomb from 25,000 feet, you don't see people die. You know they're going to die, but you don't see it. They're small. They're like a small dot. But this time we watched them die, and it was not a good thing that you'd want to watch. I was glad that we won that part, but yet you're sorry that you can see so many people dying, but most of them died. And so we went back to our base, and we had accomplished our mission, which was to destroy something. That's what the major said. You must find something to destroy. We destroyed 2 things, the depot and a train. That train was heading south, which meant it was going to kill Americans. We were aimed north. So we were not, I don't think we were too sorry to have killed all those Germans, but eventually it had to hit you when you think that you would wear it like 10,000 feet. We could see everything perfectly, and we watched everybody die. It's the only time in our World War II experience that we could watch people die. It happened on D-Day. So we went back to base. We got there. I think we landed at 11:35 or something like that. And I spoke to the pilot, and I said, Dan, are you going to be able to see the runway? He said, I don't know. He said, it's pretty dark out there. And I said, what do you think you're going to do? He said, we got to land. He said, we don't have enough gas to go anywhere. So we have to land. So he said, I've got to find a place to land. And then he said, I know some places, because we land in the same place always. He said, if we could find those places, we could land properly. So apparently he made a circle a couple of times, and then he saw something he knew, and he put the plane down. He did it beautifully, and we were all safe. And that was the end of D-Day. The second mission saved the first mission, as I would rate it, because we didn't do a darn thing in the first mission.
In just a moment, Mr. Bolino shares how he looks at D-Day now, all these years later. Veterans Chronicles will be right back. This is Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Columbus. Our guest this week is August Bolino, a navigator on a B-17 bomber in the 8th Air Force, operating out of England. Just before the break, Mr. Bolino walked us through his 2 missions on D-Day. Many years later, he returned to Normandy, and that trip helped him put the events of D-Day into perspective.
Now, I want to tell you what I learned about D-Day. And I had to go back there to learn it. I asked my wife probably 10 times if she wanted to go to Paris so I could see what happened on D-Day. She said no every time. Then it was in August, and I forgot the exact date. She's in the kitchen, and she says to me, "We should go to Paris." And I almost fainted because she had said no to me 10 times at least. And I walked in the kitchen. I said, "What'd you say?" She said, we should go to Paris." She said, you've wanted to go see where you bombed. I said, "We should do that right now. The weather's nice." And so I got 2 tickets to Paris. And then we got a bus down to a place called Pointe du Hoc, where we bombed. And I told my wife, I said, "Stay on the sidewalk here. I'm going down this." The gun went down at a 45-degree angle. And I went into it, and I realized why we could never destroy that gun. The concrete was about, I'm guessing, 14, 15 feet thick all over. We never could have, we couldn't put a 500-pound bomb there and destroy that. It would be impossible. When I came out of the turret and I looked across the street, all you could see was white crosses. And I said to myself, I wonder how many crosses there are there. And as I was thinking, I looked to the left, and way up the street was only about 8 or 9 feet wide, so I would imagine it was one auto could go up and back, but no 2 autos could go there at the same time. So at the top of this road, there were 3 soldiers with rifles on their right shoulder marching down towards me. And I wondered, what in the world do they want? So they came 1 foot from me, and the man in the middle, I learned later, was the man in charge of that cemetery across the street where there were all the white crosses. And I said to him, "How many persons died on D-Day?" And he said, 9,200. And I thought, Lord, that's a rather big number. And I said to myself, that must be a record. So I said, I'll check when I get home. Then I asked him a second question. I said, how many people drowned on D-Day? He said 4,200. And I thought, Lord again. Now, I must tell you about these 2 numbers, 9,200 total and 4,400 who drowned. And I've got to tell you 3 different stories now. They're all involved in those numbers of 9,200. First was they had some glider pilots. Glider pilots, as you know, don't have an engine. They get pulled by a plane with an engine. Once they get off the ground, they can fly around in the air with the glider. A lot of them crashed. They crashed onto rooftops, to the sides of buildings. They crashed in the street. They crashed in railroad tracks. They crashed all over. That was the first one. Second, the guys who, what do you call them? They have the paratroopers. They were at about 3,000 feet only, I think. And they jumped out and their chutes opened and they were coming down extremely slowly. I mean, they were just floating in the air like this. And on the ground, more and more German women showed up. And they had something in mind. We found out what they had in mind when they went into the house and brought out pitchforks. They were going to kill the paratroopers when they landed. And they did just that. Everyone who landed was jabbed 3 or 4 times with some kind of a pitchfork. And I don't know how many of them died. No one knew, but they had the number. They must have had the number later. So that was the second thing that went wrong. The third was by far the worst. There were, I don't know how many hundred of these landing crafts that were supposed to land on the sand, take the GIs off into the sand, and then go back to base. Well, they made this long circle like this, and they stopped. And a sergeant over here decided that if he was to go onto that sand, he could not possibly turn that boat around. How would he get back to England? He wouldn't. 20 feet above him were machine guns, and then there was that 16-inch gun right beside it. So those Germans could have killed every American who landed there. So he decided he wasn't going to go onto that sand. Instead, he said, I'll have my soldiers swim. It was only 15 yards. He said they can swim 15 yards. So he gave the command. And every soldier who jumped in the water didn't come up. Never came up. So you have to ask, well, why not? Why didn't he come up? Because he forgot something. He forgot that every GI soldier had to carry what he would need walking into Germany. And he had things on his back that weighed 65 pounds. He had all kinds of things. And when he jumped in the water, he went straight down and landed at the bottom of the sea there. That's where the 4,400 came from. Every boat did the same thing. They allowed their soldiers to jump in the water, and not one could swim 15 yards. No one can swim 15 yards when they got 15 pounds in their back, 65 pounds in their back. So that's, to me, I have a great difficulty trying to answer the question, was D-Day a success or not? The only answer I can give is that it was a failure at first, but was a great success in the second mission. So that the best you could say is that it was a neutral kind of event. We didn't gain anything. Now, what we gained took place in June 7th, 8th, and 9th. What happened then? The Army Corps of Engineers came by. They made a road in the water, and then there was this 20-foot high thing which had machine guns on it. They wanted to make a road through it because to the left of them was a Belgian road that went all the way up to the top of Belgium. And in those 3 days, they made huge cuts and dumped them all over. And the tanks, there were tanks in ships, in boats actually. The tanks came down, they went through the hole, and they went up the street, up the highway. And when these people got to the top of that road in Belgium, there was a bridge there. And I'm trying to think of the name of it. It was a famous bridge. Anyway, our soldiers started walking into Germany. To me, that's the beginning of the end of Germany, because that's when every day American soldiers were marching into Germany. And with the help of the Air Force, I think that said goodbye to the Germans. They did kill a lot of Americans, but we killed far more than they did. So that was, I think D-Day in one sense was a success, but it came after D-Day, not during D-Day. During D-Day, there were too many people getting killed, 9,200. By the way, when we got back from our visit to Paris, I went to Google and I typed, what is the largest number of soldiers who were killed in one day in combat? And the answer came back in like 2 seconds, 13,700. And I said, and where did it happen? And they said, it happened in World War I when a British colonel visited the British trench. Now, you should know that in World War I, there was a trench here, which was British, and 150 yards away was a trench there, which was German. And during holidays, the two trenches got together. They sang songs together, particularly at Christmas time. They sang a lot of songs at Christmas time. They sang the same songs. It didn't matter whether you sang them in German or American. So they weren't fighting each other. But this colonel wanted the British to fight the Germans. So he says to the major who's in charge of the trench, he says, I want those soldiers marching towards Germany here, right over there. You can see it, he said. So the major gives the command. All soldiers get over the trench and march towards Germany. The Germans, they didn't tell anybody, but they had put in 12 machine guns along the whole trench. It was a long trench. It was a very long trench, and they needed a machine gun every few yards, or maybe every city block or something. I don't know how they measured it, but that's how they got 13,700 British dead soldiers. The soldiers had to walk into machine guns. That was the stupidest colonel I've ever known in my history. How in the God's name did he think they were going to walk into machine guns? Our 9,200 was the second largest. And I suppose that's good news. We don't want to be the first one. You have to go higher than 13,700. That to me was, I couldn't imagine that a colonel would demand that those British soldiers walk into those machine guns. But that's what happened. Now, I don't know how I would rate D-Day. Sometimes I think it was not a success, because really 9,200 dead is not a successful mission. Not when you have airplanes crashing and you have gliders crashing and boats sinking and everything seemed to go wrong, except for the second mission. Every single airplane destroyed something in Germany. So I would say that if the second mission is so good, that it must have counteracted what was bad about the first mission. And so in that sense, D-Day was not a total loss.
August Bolino, a veteran of the U.S. Army Air Corps and a veteran of World War II, including D-Day. I'm Greg Corombos, and this is Veterans Chronicles. Hi, this is Greg Corombos, and thanks for listening to Veterans Chronicles, a presentation of the American Veterans Center. For more information, please visit AmericanVeteransCenter.org. You can also follow the American Veterans Center on Facebook, and on Twitter, we're at AVC Update. Subscribe to the American Veterans Center YouTube channel for full oral histories and special features. And of course, please subscribe to the Veterans Chronicles podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and please join us next time for Veterans Chronicles.